Hey y'all, it's Jennifer. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am coming to you with the in or out book tag, and this is really inspired by the fact that I've been seeing this tag go around. Jill from the Book Bully did it most recently with her friend Jen, and Matthew Sharapa did it with Claire from Claire Reads Books and Jen from Insert Literary Pun Here. The tag was originally created by Rick McDonnell, and it's essentially an either-or type of thing. Do we think these things in books are in or out? And I've really enjoyed watching other people do this tag, particularly because in the case of Matthew Sharapa and Jill, they have done it with someone else, which has caused it to be a real conversation piece, whether or not you agree or disagree on whether these things are in or out. And so you definitely need to let me know in the comments down below how you feel about some of these, because I think some of these things are quite controversial, whether or not you think these things are in or out. So let's just get right into the tag. The first prompt is reading the last page first. And I don't really have a strong opinion on this. I think some people feel strongly one way or the other that you should never read the last page of a book first. I don't necessarily care. The older I have gotten, the less I have cared about spoilers, and the less spoilers affect my enjoyment of a book or a story, if that makes any sense. So it's not really something I've ever done. The only time I can remember reading the last page first was for the last Harry Potter book. I did, in fact, spoil myself for how Harry Potter ended because I needed to make sure that he lived. But I've never done that with any other series that I felt passionately about, and I never really feel inclined to do it, so I guess I would say it's out. And I think in a broader sense, it's also out, because I remember this being something that happened a whole lot more frequently a few years back, and now I just don't hear people doing it as much. Maybe there's just not a really big series in the same way that there was a few years ago, where people were really invested in finding out what was going to happen, and so they definitely wanted to know the ending before the rest of the book. So I guess I'm going to say it's out, even though I don't really particularly feel strongly about this one. Now, the second prompt I do feel strongly about. This is enemies to lovers. Now, I used to hate this when I was younger. And so for me, it is something that was out that has come in. But this goes into a larger discussion that is going on at the moment in the publishing world and in the bookish world in general, which is that most things being categorized as enemies to lovers right now are not at all enemies to lovers. They're basically dislike to lovers. When I think of enemies to lovers, I think of stuff like Reylo, like Kylo Ren and Rey, which even that is not necessarily enemies to lovers in the sense that I'm thinking of, in the sense that I would really want to see. But I mean something on that scale. You are on two very different sides. You are maybe on the opposite sides of a war. I know this really only goes for fantasy, but I think it could be done in a contemporary work as well. I'm just not really a romance reader, but I think a lot of stuff that's being categorized as hate to love today is basically like, he irritated me, so I don't like him. Well, that's not really enemies to lovers. But overall, I would say this is very in, because it is something that is constantly being put on book blurbs, and I think is probably why, as a cataloging term, it has lost a lot of power, because people are slamming it on everything because they know it is going to sell if they say it is enemies to lovers. So in a broad sense, and just kind of in the publishing world, I definitely think this is in. But I also think it is in for me personally. I would love to see more of it. I just don't think it's being done in the way that I would like it to be done, if that makes sense. Dream sequences. These are out. These have been out for a very long time, and I have never liked a dream sequence. I have very rarely felt that dream sequences added a single thing to a book. They are just a waste of my time, frankly, except maybe if you are kind of like, I don't know, a prophet. You can see into the future. Your dreams have meaning to the overall story because they signal what is going to come, because there were elements of this in Game of Thrones, for example, with a character named Bran. And we have actually never gotten the payoff for what that was set up to be, because that series will never end. But you knew that the moments with him in kind of this dream world, this dream sequence type thing, you knew that those were going to be important at a later date and that they were actually giving you pertinent information. For me, for the most part, most dream sequences don't give me any pertinent information. They don't do anything for me. So I think these are out. And I also think, really just in general, in the past few years, reading new releases, I don't see dream sequences the way that I used to. So maybe dream sequences just in general have gone out of fashion. Number 4 is love triangles. In, they will always be in. This is the hill I will die on. I love love triangles. I don't care a thing about just a regular romance in a book, but if it is a love triangle, I'm there, I'm invested, I'm really interested in what is going on. A love triangle is the ultimate way to get me interested in a romance. I just don't care about it otherwise. And I think it is because love triangles can be so interesting for character development. They get a bad rap nowadays because they have shown up so frequently, particularly in the YA world. But in the YA world is where they work the best and is where they are doing what they should be doing, which is offering not just two love interests to the main character, perhaps, but offering two paths that they as a character could take, that could affect the plot, that could affect the world. A love triangle should do a whole bunch of things at once. And the best love triangles are great in terms of romance, but they also affect the world, the plot, the character development of each of the characters in the love triangle. I recognize there have been a lot of poor love triangles done, especially in the past few years, and I think there's a reason why people now say they really hate a love triangle, and it's because they've seen it done so many times and probably not done very well. But even a weakly done triangle, I can get into it. I love a love triangle. Those are definitely in. Number 5 is cracked spines. I think these are out. They don't bother me. In fact, they used to be the only way I would read a book. Like, that would be one of the first things I would do, is crack the spine of a book. But that was in the days when mostly I only read mass market paperbacks. And to me, those don't function well unless their spine has been cracked somewhere. But now that I have found the more floppy paperbacks, the trade paperbacks, I'm less into a cracked spine. They don't really bother me though. For example, if I pick up a used book at the used bookstore or anything, it doesn't bother me that the spine is cracked unless it means the book won't open anywhere else but at that place. And so I just think they're out, because that does really annoy me when you get a cracked spine, a used book, and it just wants to open to that one spot. So those are out. Number 6 is Back to My Small Town. This works for me in very certain situations. I think it nearly always works in a thriller, and I'm always excited about it in a mystery, in a thriller, in television, film, books. I love when someone goes back to their small town. One of my favorite instances of this is Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. I love that miniseries. I've actually never read the book, but the miniseries really encapsulated that vibe to me. Somebody going back to their small town and not wanting to. And I think going back to my small town also works particularly well in the American South. I think it feels very Gothic to me, Southern Gothic to me. I don't know why. That's a trope that feels like it plays particularly well here in the South, but that's something that I'm really interested in. So I think this is definitely in certain places. I think this is also in romance, but I don't read a lot of romance, so I don't know. But I think for me, definitely it is in. Number 7 is Monsters Are Regular People. And I, like everyone else who has done this tag, apparently is very confused by this prompt. I want to say this is in because I love the idea that monsters are regular people. And by that I mean like a literal monster appears human to you, a vampire, a shapeshifter, something like that, a fairy, the fae. Absolutely love it. Monsters are regular people. But I think this can spin, and it can also be the Scooby-Doo. Monsters are regular people. Take your mask off. You thought it was supernatural, but it's actually just an average person. That I don't like. I think this could also go for just the evilest people you know are not actual monsters. They're just regular people. That's also in. So this prompt can go in several different directions. I think all of them are in, even though I don't really like the Scooby-Doo approach at all. I do think all of the other interpretations are my vibe. I'm really interested in the concept of monsters or regular people in books, but I would still prefer things to have a supernatural tilt. I'm really going with this in a literal sense, and I think this is probably a more metaphorical prompt, but let's just go with it. This is in. Number 8 is no paragraph breaks. Out. Look at yourself. Look at your choices. If you were a writer who was writing a book with no paragraph breaks, why? Why are you doing that in this day and age? I just don't understand it. Paragraphs are needed for a lot of different reasons, and Jill mentioned this in her version of this tag, I think, that really paragraphs serve as a great place to stop reading, just as a visual break. And that's really why they are important to me, because I really don't even like when a book has extremely long paragraphs. When a paragraph takes up an entire page, I start to struggle with it because I need a place to visually set a book down, but I am somebody who will set a book down in the middle of a page. So to me, paragraphs are really valuable for that. But if you're somebody who has to read to the end of a chapter, has to reach the end of a page, that may not bother you so much. But for me, this is definitely out. And most of the time when I hear of this with more modern books, they are trying to be deliberately difficult, in my opinion, or they're trying to be experimental, because I think it's Ducks Newburyport doesn't have any paragraph breaks. And I think that's actually the goal of that book, is that you're supposed to kind of go on a journey with it. You're supposed to work with it. And so that probably has its own purpose. There was a purpose to that writing style. But just in general, no, this is out. Number 9, multi-generational sagas. I don't know how I feel about multi-generational sagas. It's been a long time since I read one, and I used to eat up those series like John Jake's that just kind of took you through an entire family's line from the American Revolution up to today, and I used to really eat those up. And maybe I would now. I just think now I am less interested in a series, but also in so many different characters and timelines moving so quickly. If that makes sense, I'm more interested in an author honing in on a particular character or a particular group of characters and spending a lot of time with them. And I don't think with multi-generational sagas you get that amount of time spent with characters the way you would like to. So I'm gonna say this is out. Number 10 is rereading. This is hard because on the one hand, I like to look at these prompts according to me and my own interests, but I also am trying to look at them from the perspective of publishing or from the perspective of the wider bookish community. And I think for the wider bookish community, rereading is out. I don't see many people rereading anymore. And that's an unfortunate thing, because I think for a lot of us who have always been readers, rereading was a large part of our reading diet prior to adulthood, certainly. But now I think everyone feels the pressure, particularly if you're on BookTube, that you want to keep up with things. You want to know what the new releases are. You want to constantly be reading what you are bringing in. And I think that means that rereading is kind of edged out. And that's an unfortunate thing. For me, though, I think rereading is in. I tried to make a concerted effort last year to reread more, and that was one of the main successes of 2021 for me. I reread quite a few books. So for me, rereading is in, but so far in 2022, I haven't reread anything. So maybe rereading is kind of out, but I think it's in. For me, it is in, but I think for the wider bookish world, it seems to be out. Number 11 is artificial intelligence. I love artificial intelligence, and maybe not artificial intelligence. I specifically love robots. And I love sentient robots. I love robots that are struggling with humanity, that want to be human. And I think of them as AI in a way, but they're not really. but I think this is in, because I think those elements go hand in hand. For me, that is so interesting, the grappling with a machine being able to do what a human can do. So I think AI is in. Number 12 is drop caps, and if I'm not mistaken, and it's terrible that I, in particular, as somebody with a library degree, does not know what this is off the top of my head, but I think a drop cap is that kind of embellished letter right at the front of a chapter that was really popular in older books. That's in, or it should be in. We should be bringing that back. That's gorgeous. I love it, but I don't see it done. So I would say, in a broader sense, those are apparently out. I don't know when I have seen that done in a modern published book, or even in a reprint of a classic for that matter. But I'd like them to come back. I would like for them to be in. 13, happy endings. This is another one that I'm torn on. I think in the wider bookish world, in terms of publishing, I won't say in terms of the readership. I think in terms of readers, most readers are very hungry for a happy ending. But I think publishers are kind of pushing the more gray, darker ending, and that's been the case in fantasy for a very, very long time. And I actually am going to say, kind of controversially, I am on the side of a more melancholy ending right now. I think for me, happy endings and melancholy endings, anything like that, it should fit the overall tone of the rest of the story, the rest of the series, the rest of the book. Because for me, I think of examples like, this was a television show, but I think about Merlin. Merlin had perhaps one of the saddest endings, the BBC Merlin had one of the saddest series endings that I have ever seen in my life. And it was also one of the worst endings of a TV series I have seen in my life, because in no way, shape, or form was that the tone of the rest of the show. The rest of the show never once indicated that it would go in that kind of dark direction. So I think that was poorly done. But also, an example from a television show, I wish I could think of a book off the top of my head, but Vikings ended with a very melancholy, but also kind of hopeful tone for some characters, but essentially almost everyone died. And for me, that was the happy ending. That was what that show should have done, because throughout the entire show, death was the theme. Death was what characters were ruminating on. And I thought, if we end this show and everyone is alive, we've missed the point. And so that, for me, a melancholy, sort of sad ending was really, really appropriate, and actually, in a way, was kind of a happy ending to me because it fit with the tone of the story. I think genre also plays into this here. For example, romance, absolutely. Romance should always end in a happy ending, and I think it's quite controversial when it doesn't. I don't actually think a book should be marketed as a romance if it doesn't have a happy ending. I would really like for happy endings to be in some cases, particularly in fantasy, where I feel like we've done the very dark, sad ending where essentially like everyone dies. That's been happening for a very long time, and I think we need to breathe some new life into the fantasy genre by having some people be happy at the end of a series. I don't know when that will happen, but that's my opinion. So I'm kind of in between here, but I'm going to say that happy endings are in. Plot points that only converge at the end. Love it. This is in. I don't feel like I need to explain this. I think that is one of the joys of being a reader, is putting things together like a puzzle, and when you reach the end and everything converges, it's just a really satisfying feeling that can't be replicated elsewhere. And I think that it's done particularly well in fantasy. A lot of the time, you often deal with a group of characters that are really spread out, that are no longer together, and so you have to wait until the end of the book for them to converge, for timelines to converge, for characters to meet up. And that, for me, is always one of the best parts of reading a fantasy series. So for me, this is definitely in. Number 15 is detailed magic systems. For me personally, this is out. And it's been out for a long time. In fact, for me, this was never in. I'm gonna get up on my soapbox here for a minute about detailed magic systems. This is my thing about them. For me, magic is magic because it is kind of unexplained. The second that you have told me every step of the process to enact a spell, it then starts to move out of the realm of magic for me and into the realm of science. And I am going to call out Brandon Sanderson here because I just think he's the most iconic example of somebody using a hard magic system. But Mistborn, for example, you have to ingest all these metals. One metal does this, one metal does that. If you take all of them, this will happen to you. That's science. That is almost science fiction to me. Some of this is also the fact that for me, most fantasy that I love is still the older classic fantasy of the 80s and 90s, which there is a lot of problems with, I'll be honest. But I think they understood that there was kind of an otherworldly magical quality to those stories. And a lot of times that magic is not explained. It's never explained why dragons live in this world. It's never explained why certain wizards can do certain things. I think The Witcher does this really well. It sort of explains magic, but it doesn't hold your hand through it, which I really, really like. So for me, detailed magic systems are out. But the next question is classic fantasy races, and this one is hard because for me personally, they're out, but I would also say that just in terms of what's going on in fantasy right now, they are also out, just in a broader sense. I've seen a couple of orc books in recent years, but really very little deals with elves anymore or dwarves, unless it is carrying on from an older series. I think these could be in again if they were given some fresh life. For example, the elves, I really think elves have transitioned into the Fae, and I think largely probably Sarah J. Maas is the reason for that, why we have kind of moved away from using elves in fantasy, and now mostly you see Fae. I prefer Fae to elves any day of the week, but I'm really weak for the Fae, as you all know. So I'm excited by that, but I think they could come back if somebody was willing to breathe a little bit of new life into them and do something really creative. But for me personally, they're out. And I also just think in the sense of the publishing world, they are also out. Unreliable narrators. I love it. I will never not love an unreliable narrator, except maybe in thrillers. I do think it's overdone in thrillers because even though I don't read a whole lot of thrillers, I do watch a lot of adaptations of thriller books. And that's something that's very tired to me as somebody who technically observes something in their neighborhood, but because they are always drinking wine, because they're an alcoholic, you're not quite sure whether or not they saw anything. And that to me is irritating because I think it is a trope that is overdone in that genre. Otherwise, in fantasy, in classics, in contemporary fiction, in historical fiction, oh my gosh, in historical fiction, please give me an unreliable narrator. They are definitely in. Number 18 is evil protagonists. This is out for me. I'm tired of it, kind of, because I've seen it done and I don't think it's always done well. I like maybe a story where somebody kind of devolves, where somebody becomes the villain, but you see where they start. Something where the protagonist is just outright evil, I'm really not going to be happy with. I'm thinking about Prince of Thorns by Mark Lawrence here. There has never been a book that upset me more than that. And I don't really see how you as a reader get really involved in a plot like that just when a protagonist is outright evil. I don't really get much out of that. I don't really get involved in those stories. Whereas if a protagonist is just unlikable, yes, I am interested in that. But I think there's a difference between evil and unlikable. And for me, I think evil protagonists are out. Number 19, The Chosen One. This is in. This will never be out, in my opinion. The Chosen One is an overdone trope for a reason, and it's because it works. I really love the trope of the Chosen One. I think it can't be overdone. This, similarly to love triangles, is a hill that I am willing to die on. I really truly believe this is one of the best tropes out there. And I think, again, maybe if you grew up with a certain type of genre, if you grew up with 80s and 90s fantasy like me, or you grew up in the age when YA was becoming a thing, you probably just have a fondness for this trope because you saw it so frequently. I definitely think the Chosen One trope can be tedious when you've seen it a lot, but I just don't ever believe it's truly been done badly. So that's just me, that's my opinion, but it is a hill I'm willing to die on. The Chosen One is in. Number 20, When the Protagonist Dies. This is also in. I am kind of a big fan of this, actually. I think I respect when a book is willing to take a risk, and I always have liked that, even when I don't necessarily like the execution or how it turns out. I am really respectful of an author that's willing to take a risk and willing to do something just a little bit different. Again, though, this, like the happy endings, I think this has to fit with the overall tone of the story thus far. It can't just be something that comes out of the blue. I think that is when people get frustrated, and that's when it doesn't work. But if it has always been set up like that, oh my gosh, I really like it. So this is definitely in. 21 really long chapters, out. I don't like really long chapters, and I also don't like really short chapters. Both of those are out for me. There is a happy medium. There is kind of a Goldilocks standard for chapters for me, which is between 5 and 10 pages. Chapters like James Patterson, where it was literally a page, that's irritating to me. And similarly, chapters that are like 50 pages are also irritating to me. I'm not somebody who has to get to the end of a chapter to put a book down, but if you are that type of person, that is so tedious and exhausting. So for me, these are out. 22 is French Flaps, in forever. I love French Flaps. They are the ideal for me. I really love when a book has them. The unfortunate thing is, they go hand in hand with this next prompt, which is Deckled Edges. You often get a French flap book with Deckled Edges, and I am not a big fan of Deckled Edges. I think those are out. I used to like them, or at least they didn't bother me. Maybe I won't say that I liked them, but now they really just make it difficult to turn a page. You start turning a page and you're 5 pages ahead rather than the page that you wanted. I just think they're difficult to work with, and I don't really care for them. So those are out, but French Flaps are definitely in. 24 is signed copies by the author. And I don't particularly care about this one way or the other. I think this is probably in a larger sense, in the sense of the publishing world. I think there's definitely been a push for this in recent years, in author signings and author events, and just frankly being able to order a signed book online. I think that's been a really big thing in recent years. For me personally, I don't care, so I guess I'm gonna say out. 25 is Dog Earring Pages. This is out. This is something I used to do, so I feel like I am able to really comment on this. I used to do this, especially as a child. I just really used to do this because I would lose bookmarks pretty frequently as well. And now it just bothers me. And it even bothers me to see other people do it, when 9 times out of 10, what you do with your books doesn't bother me at all. Dog earring does kind of bother me, and I don't know why. I think it's because it doesn't actually, from the outside of the book, often really signal where you are. You just turned the page down, but in a lot of books nowadays, I don't really think it's noticeable where you've dog-eared a page. So I guess to me, my question is, why are you bothering to do it? So it's definitely out for me. And last but not least is chapter titles instead of numbers. This is out. I like a number, I really do. I don't mind a chapter title, but I would rather them be used in conjunction than just have a title instead of a number. There's something about seeing a number, even when you don't know how many chapters a book has, that makes you feel like you were at least making progress in some way, shape, or form. But if you're reading on your Kindle, you definitely can find out how many chapters there are, so you feel really accomplished as you complete each chapter when you see the number. But just seeing a chapter title, I don't know about that. So I'm gonna say that that is out. So as I said, let me know down below how you feel about some of these prompts. I think some of these are pretty controversial. And definitely, I think it says a lot about who you are as a reader and what you really like based on what you said here. But I would love to know your thoughts on these down below, but that's going to be all for me today. I hope you're all having a great week. Happy reading. Goodbye.